If you look back at South African history, you realize that ever since really the discovery of gold, particularly deep-level mining meant that you had to have large amounts of capital because to sink even a single mine shaft is very, very expensive. And that meant a dependence on foreign capital. And ever since then, South Africa has depended on a fairly steady inflow of foreign capital. And if you think about it, we have to. We're running a budget deficit of about 5% of GDP, and we're running a balance of payments deficit of about 5% of GDP. So every year, year on year, 10% or so of our GDP, we've got to borrow it or it's got to come in as investment because we are not covering it ourselves. Now, if you get a situation where that flow of investment dries up, then I think any ruling group in this country is in a terrible spot. And it's happened several times in history, happened in the early 20s when you got the Rand Revolt, happened in the 30s when you got the fusion crisis, and it happened in 1985. You'll remember the crisis over the Rubicon speech and the resulting withdrawal of loans by Chase Manhattan and other banks. And in the period that followed, it was a very stagnant, difficult period. I don't know how many of you remember 1985 to 90, but it was not an easy or pleasant period. The UDF had been hammered, but it was still there. Quite clearly, there was a resistance from the large part of the population. The government was in complete control, but it wasn't going anywhere at all. And I would say really that the change which happened in 1990 was really like someone ringing up the money that was already in the till from 1985. I think 1985 was really what did it, and then you get this 5-year period which is sort of stagnant from the point of view of growth and investment, and the country going nowhere. And I mean, I think de Klerk said it. He said, when he came to us, he said, we can't go on like this. Now, that had been true for 5 years, really. And now, I think that we are in a period a little bit like that now again, in the sense that foreign investment has dried up. Last year, South Africa invested far more abroad than was invested here. We became net foreign investors ourselves. And you can see it. I'm sure you're all aware, if you're at a business school, that South African companies are exporting capital and looking for opportunities in other countries, because if you've got a minus 1.3 growth rate, then there's not very much low-hanging fruit here. So they're all putting money into moving into the rest of Africa or even into Europe. And this, of course, domestic investment and foreign investment are always a bit the same because, if foreigners can see the locals aren't investing, that's a reason for them not to do so, and so on. You don't usually get contradictory capital flows. Now, I think that this is what we are drifting towards is some sort of crunch because this cannot go on indefinitely. The IMF says that for a country like South Africa, you should think of debt, you shouldn't go above 40% of GDP, your debt burden. Now, we are currently at 48, but if you add in the debt of the state-owned enterprises, it becomes 59. And if you add in the debt from municipalities and so forth, it's over 60. And it's increasing. So that is clearly what we have to watch. And of course, in particular, what everyone has become very concerned about is the rating of the credit agencies, because we're only 2 grades now above investment level. And as you possibly know, but if you don't, let me just say, the way it works is that international bonds, you have to have investment level bonds if you're going to sell them to a wide range of banks, insurance companies, pension funds. They're simply forbidden, often by law, to buy bonds, junk bonds, which are lower than that. So if our bonds went below that level, which has just happened to Brazil, several things happen. One is that your bonds get dumped by all those international institutions. Secondly, there will be capital flight from that country, and of course people living in that country, Brazilians now, are not very keen to buy their country's bonds. If they can see everyone else dumping them, it's not a good reason for them to buy them. And of course, in turn, that puts up the interest rate on the debt, which makes it harder to pay. And, where that usually ends up is an IMF bailout, where somebody has to come along and say, look, you need to change. Now, quite clearly, if we ever ended up in that situation, we know the conditionalities we would face. They would be the 4 conditions which have been put to us over and over again in the last 10 years. And to me, this would be a complete crisis for the ruling party. Now, it's possible that it may not go like that. It could go, and the way it has been going, is that the Treasury has been careful not to borrow it very much in foreign currency. This is clever because it means that you don't end up with a situation that, say, Brazil's got, where you borrowed heavily in dollars, your currency falls against the dollar and repayment gets very, very difficult indeed. So if you borrow in your own currency, then it makes that much easier. But the problem still remains, because if you do downgrade to junk bond status, you will still get the capital flight, you will still get all the negative economic effects. And of course, under apartheid, we know what happened. You would have prescribed assets where, by law, insurance companies and pension funds are made to buy government bonds. They're not given the choice. And of course, what goes with that is tough exchange controls. Because if you tell people, we're going to force you to buy something here, the message generally is get your money out. And of course, what you then get a lot of illegitimate capital flight, and then you get people trying to stop that with exchange controls. So that's the way it goes. Now, it may not go all that way here, but we are moving like that. And the problem, as I say, is that our political system seems to be stuck. It's working as a patronage machine, and for those running it, that's probably the main point of the whole exercise. But that doesn't mean that you're taking decisions which you need to. And the result, I'm afraid, is that we are moving to some sort of crunch.